I'm Maddie Gustafson, and I'm a project coordinator at NEHA, and I'd like to welcome you to the final webinar in the 4-part Data and Environmental Health Best Practices webinar series. Just a few Zoom reminders before we get started. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please submit them in the Q&A box, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. Any other inquiries, please send them through the chat feature. So to get started, I would like to introduce Sarah Schacht and Chris Metcalf. They are our speakers for this session and will lead our Q&A after the presentation.
Hi, I'm Sarah Schacht, and I'm the coordinator for the SAFE Data Program at NEHA, which is funded by the Center for Disease Control. Today we're going to be learning about the SAFE Data Standard, or Schema, as we call it a lot. And today I have with me Maddie from NEHA, Maddie Gustafson, and Chris Metcalf, who I've been collaborating with on the Schema. We're really excited to present it to you today. And it is essentially the 4th and final webinar of our series on open data. You've received tons of foundational knowledge on open data, what it is, how to make it open, how to ensure that your technology supports open data, and third-party use of open data from environmental health and government agencies and governments. So this session today will cap it all off. We will walk you through how the first environmental health data standard came to be, the research that went into it, the strategy and reasons for developing this standard in the way we did, and how to implement it yourself. So it's going to be a quick tour of this data standard, and I'm going to get started here. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll do some Q&A after this segment. So just walk through a little bit of our agenda. We're also going to talk about some implementation details that I think will be really useful to take some notes on. The background on the data standard is this. Over 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, the Center for Disease Control had a project to try to open up aquatic facility inspection data from 4 states around the United States. And this process, just to get 1 year of inspection data out of 4 states, and essentially get all of that data to speak the same language in the same spreadsheet, or be able to line up fields of inspection in the same spreadsheet, and then be able to analyze that data, took consultants over $1 million of billable hours and time to be able to gather that data from 4 states and make it into a useful format. And it took over a year of work. I think the CDC wisely said, there's got to be a better way to do this, right? And they were inspired by data standards like lives for restaurant inspection data, and thought perhaps there's an opportunity here to start piloting in environmental health open data standards, and to start with a really important topic area for environmental health, which is aquatic facility inspection aquatic facility inspection data, and just the reports themselves. And if a jurisdiction has scores, great, but it's more important to find out what is contributing to challenges we see in aquatic facilities, or how can we better analyze this information coming out of jurisdictions, and to make this information available for everyone to use. So they had a great vision there, and they came to NEHA to get that project started. And I've been proud to work with NEHA on a project plan, and then developing this data standard and leading the ecosystem scan and research, which led to the this schema that we'll see today. And essentially, CDC found that it was very difficult for CDC, and other users of aquatic facility inspection data have found that it's very difficult to compare inspection information jurisdiction to jurisdiction. You often have to make public disclosure requests. Sometimes these files are in paper or PDFs, which means you're scraping information to get it into a system you can analyze it in. And that even we have a kind of a potato problem where even jurisdictions within the same state, counties within the same state, cities, will call types of inspections by different names, or tag it with different terms. And this means that we have a really difficult time making sure that we're all on the same page with how jurisdictions are inspecting aquatic facilities and the venues of those facilities. So some of the project goals were to create a consistent method for sharing aquatic facility inspection information, and one that wasn't overcomplicated, didn't require to change any internal process, and delivered machine readable data, which you all have learned about through our foundational webinars on open data. But just to recap that, machine readable data is data that is in a format like CSV or XML that is essentially tagging what it's talking about, that a computer can pull in that information and go, aha, I know what that is. And so human readable, we often refer to as, say, a PDF or a piece of paper, things that you and I as humans can read and understand what's there, but a computer, an automated system, it's going to have to make some guesses on what's there because it's not machine readable for the computer. So the other goals were to launch 4 demonstration projects. We'll talk about them later. I'm really excited about these demonstration projects. And enable environmental health agencies across the United States and internationally, if they want, to launch this data standard. Finally, we use the Model Aquatic Health Code, which we'll talk a little bit more about, as the foundation for this schema. And essentially, we're talking about, well, what are these critical violations that those who are stakeholders in the MAC shared are the most critical things for us to be noting on aquatic facility inspections. When we undertook this project, there was an understanding that we would have to have a better we would have to know what was possible for jurisdictions around the United States to make public. And so we undertook what we think may be the largest ecosystem scan of environmental health aquatic facility inspection information in the United States. Overall, we had 919 jurisdictions that we analyzed what information they had available publicly. There were well over 900 that we looked at or tried to find information on, but we found 919 instances of jurisdictions with publicly accessible aquatic facility inspection information, which is interesting because there's over 3,000 environmental health jurisdictions across the United States. And what struck us is that of these, we had 6 states and 2 multi-jurisdictional agencies which aggregate local jurisdiction aquatic facility information, which means that across that entire state, their aquatic facility inspection information is presented consistently. And that is a huge amount of progress, just to have essentially a standard format and a standard range of fields that are presented within a state. And then we also looked at who is opening their data, their aquatic facility inspection data. The only known to us, and let us know if you have open data for aquatic facility inspection information that we didn't catch in here. It's a big aquatic world out there. But these are the jurisdictions which have put their pool or aquatic facility inspection information out in open data. And I think we all have to applaud their efforts in doing so, because these are the exceptions in our field right now. And then I've highlighted 3 of these governments because they also are demonstration projects with our data project right now, and we're excited to have them launch the inspection data. We also have the state of Florida Health in this program, and we're really proud to have them as a partner on this. So the ecosystem scan we completed, we found that just 0.087% of environmental health jurisdictions share their aquatic facility inspection information in open data. And just under 8% of jurisdictions provide their inspections with downloadable data without any keyword search. So this means that you can just go and download all of the inspections for the last year to 2 years from a given county. That is, without open data, a kind of like a second best option, and we're glad to see it out there. But 679 jurisdictions in this 900 some jurisdiction ecosystem scan, we found that they were precise search only. And what do we mean by that? It means that you had to have the exact name of the pool you were looking for to be able to search for its inspection information. But imagine that you're a grandmother road tripping across the United States with 2 grandkids in the back seat, and it is a hot day and you just want to get them to a safe pool nearby. Are you going to know the name of pools that are close to you? No, probably not. You might try inputting the word pool in the city you're in if it has that ability to select the city. Essentially, it makes it really difficult for those who don't have local knowledge to be able to find inspection information on aquatic facilities. It's a great start, but it creates barriers to being able to access that information. And certainly for anyone studying aquatic facility inspections or trying to learn more about safety trends, it makes it quite difficult and time consuming to analyze that information. So as we talk about open data, I'll bring Chris Metcalf into this conversation. You'll notice he has the pool background, and it's spectacular, Chris. Thank you. So we will get started here. You've heard a lot in our previous sessions about the value of open data standards, and so I want to just kind of quickly go through some of these, and Chris is going to join me on it. But I wanted to also just say, like, one of the things that I think is the most valuable to the staff of an environmental health agency, or really any agency, is that when your inspection information is out in open data, you can dramatically reduce the time and costs of public disclosure requests, because you can just send requests over to your open data portal or wherever you're making that data available, and they can search through it themselves. Like, what a time saving that is for your team and a cost saving. So it's one of the big reasons that I support open data standards, because I realize it gives teams in government a lot more latitude to do the work they came here for, and to not have to manage public disclosure requests all the time while still staying in compliance. Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you. What are some of the values of open data standards that you'd like to talk about?
Sure, let's jump into the pool with both feet. So open data standards may seem like they actually end up making you do more work in order to release your data. It's, you know, the common tendency is for governments just to release the data they have in whatever format they have it. But standards allow you to do so in a way that will actually probably save you time in the long run, because they give you a framework for getting started. There's a common schema that the jurisdictions solving the same problem can publish into, that's going to help you in a lot of ways to make your open data program more effective. It's going to make the data more consumable by the end users, because there's a consistency between jurisdictions. If you're comparing pool data from California and Florida, you're not going to have to do, as a data scientist, a bunch of work to get that into a common structure in order to make use of it. The data is already an open data standard. It probably can be directly compared side by side, and that's one of the things that we've tried to do with the SAFE standard. It also provides you guidelines for quality assurance. One of the common problems governments have when they release open data for the first time is that there's so much data and they don't have a good way of testing that data to see if the actual, like, recorded values from the inspections or the metadata, like the facility addresses, are in a correct state. The standard includes some guidelines for how to format things like dates and numbers, and the recorded values for different inspection parameters that you can use to test your data as you're getting it into the standard. All of this makes it more plug and play for those end user data consumers, makes it more comparable between different jurisdictions because everything's set to that common baseline of the open data standard. It's a little bit more work up front, but in the long run, especially as you get more and more users of your data and they're coming in with questions about the data, a lot of that should hopefully be addressed by the process you went through to get your data into the standard and test it.
Yeah, and I would agree to that, Chris, that it's a long-term time saver. Yet we've also found that many governments who implement a open data standard, depending on the vendor that they use or how their information is managed right now, they may find that their staff time on this project is somewhere between 14 to 20 hours total to get it implemented. And then perhaps just checking on that data to make sure it's up and running, you know, as just a 15-minute calendar reminder every 6 months or so. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but there are a ton of values to government in getting your data out there in a standard. Some comparable standards. One that I've worked on actually and wrote with Chris's help, the 2.0 of the Lives Data Standard, which is used by dozens of governments across the United States and Canada to open its restaurant inspection data in a standard format, and then that's used by third parties to pull that inspection information in. GTFS, I guarantee every single one of you on this webinar has used GTFS data, even if you didn't know it. If you have ever taken a bus, if by finding that on your phone and using Google Maps or Apple Maps or any mapping product, if you've ever used transit anywhere in the world and seen when your bus or train is arriving, you were probably using GTFS. And that came out of Portland, Oregon's TriMet agency, gosh, like 13 years ago or so, and was quickly used by Google. And so the data standard was wildly popularized because you could get your transit information out into Google, and constituents, residents loved it. And then the FBI Uniform Crime Reporting Standard. Chris, do you want to talk a little bit more about that one that's in practice?
Yeah, the UCR is one that it doesn't get as much press as some of the other ones because it's much older and it actually predates a lot of the open data movement, but I think it's a good analog to what we're trying to do here with SAFE. The FBI was trying to solve a very important public safety problem, which is how do we track the most important crime metrics across thousands of policing jurisdictions across the country. And they solved it in a way very similar to how we've tried to solve things for SAFE by identifying what are the minimal viable metrics that we want to track, that we can all agree upon, what these things are, and then provide a consistent way for jurisdictions to easily report into that standard. So it doesn't try and track every single sort of low-level crime that you might have in a community, or ones where there might be a lot of differentiation between, literally the legal definitions in different places, but it tracks the most important, most critical types of crimes in a way that's consistent, and it's been doing so for well over a decade across, I'm pretty sure almost every single policing jurisdiction in the country reports up to the UCR. It's very infrequent. It's like once a year, I think, maybe. But it is a good example of how you can get some consistency by identifying what the minimal set of things are that you absolutely must track.
Yeah, thank you. So we're going to give a quick tour of the SAFE standard. 3 defining features of SAFE are that they were that it was built on the Model Aquatic Health Code. So if you're not familiar with the MAC was and still is a health code for aquatic facilities, which was a multi-stakeholder process. Over 400 stakeholders came together from across the United States to identify what are the key items that we need to be inspecting when we're inspecting aquatic facilities and venues. And so jurisdictions have adopted pieces of the MAC, have adopted critical violations. It's up to the local jurisdiction to implement the MAC as they see fit for their jurisdiction. However, we use the MAC because it created a framework for us to identify what have aquatic facility experts said that are the most important things to track. So we use the critical violations from the MAC to define the fields for the SAFE standard and to also narrow down the number of fields. You could possibly track a few hundred different types of elements of an inspection through the MAC, but we've really boiled it down to what are the most critical things to track, but also what are most common to jurisdictions, so what's accessible for you. The other defining features of the MAC include that it doesn't require any internal policy or process or technology change. You can keep what you do and keep how you manage, keep managing how you do your internal database of inspection information. We don't want to change that. We don't want to uproot your work processes. But what it allows you to do is just export your data and reformat it. And we'll talk a bit more about that. But it's meant to be easy and accessible for you all to implement. And then to produce consistently formatted aquatic facility data. We've talked a little bit more about why this is important in prior sessions and today, but really so that whoever is using your data is able to have a lot of confidence that they're reading it correctly and that they are able to compare across jurisdictions accurately. So I talked about how it's built on the Model Aquatic Health Code. And we also, we'll get to this, another key element is just that it offers a range of optional fields that each of us can use. So depending on the data that you have available, you can import more information and in these optional fields. Chris, do you want to talk a little bit more about optional fields here?
I think it might be useful to skip to the next slide and we can talk about them in relation to the fields too.
All right, thanks. Okay.
Yeah, so what we've done is we've broken a lot of the schema into required fields and optional fields. What you see here is this is the set of required fields. These are the things that should be recorded for every inspection, and that following the Model Aquatic Health Code determine whether or not a given aquatic venue is safe. So details like where the facility is, what it's called, when the inspection was, and then those key criteria like does the venue have the right kind of safety equipment? Does it have the right chemical balance? Things like that. There are additional fields that are encouraged to be recorded, but are not required in every single inspection. And those are included as optional fields beyond the ones shown here. They're useful for researchers that might want to understand the data, and they're commonly tracked by many jurisdictions, but they're not universally tracked. The ones that we see here are the ones that should be recorded for every single aquatic facility safety inspection. You'll note here that there are actually two columns for chlorine and bromine. We understand that pools don't use both chlorine and bromine at the same time. So these are included separately so that you can record, for example, the bromine value if you're inspecting a hot tub that uses bromine as its chemical, or the chlorine value if you're inspecting a pool that uses chlorine. You should not include both if on a given inspection record, if that particular pool or hot tub doesn't use the other chemical. It's a special accommodation in there to address that fact. But this is the core set of fields that should be required for every single inspection and that you need to provide as part of the SAFE standard.
Yeah, and there may be some questions that you have that we can get to as an audience at the end of this webinar about the required fields. I just want to pause here to say that part of our ecosystem scan was to reveal what it was possible to open up, what we could confirm that the majority of jurisdictions who had their information public provided in those inspections or recorded in those inspections. So there are critical fields in the MAC that we would love to have included in the SAFE standard, but we found that they were either not recorded by the majority of environmental health agencies in our study, or that we just thought the threshold was so low in terms of potential for adoption that we moved it into an optional field instead of a required field.
We also focused on the values that were most consistent between jurisdictions as well. That could be published and consistently compared from one jurisdiction to the next. That was very important too. The standard also gives you kind of a sidecar metadata file where you can include optionally the actual regulations used to check these to help researchers understand how to interpret the data as well.
Yeah, and you'll also see here that in the required fields we don't mention score. So if your jurisdiction is one that just lists the number of violations or the type of violations that a facility or venue has, no worries, you can still adopt the SAFE standard. And if you do have scores, if that's important to your jurisdiction, great. We have optional fields where you can add scoring there and ensure consistent interpretation of your score as well. Anything else on the fields you want to talk about, Chris?
Yeah, on the scoring, if you do choose to include scoring, the standard does, this is one of the things we learned from the live standard. The standard does include a way for you to, in a machine readable way, to help those consumers describe your scoring standard. So you can ensure that the consumer of the data is going to represent that accurately if they put it on a website or use it in some sort of analysis as well.
Thanks. Implementation. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris to talk about the ETL process. A lot of what we're going to talk about in this section, you've actually heard from Waldo Jaquith. And if you did not see his session, I would encourage you to go back and watch Waldo Jaquith's session on owning your data, working with IT, and selecting selecting vendors that support your open data efforts. He has a lot of great content there, and I don't want to weigh down your time with stuff you've already watched or can watch later. Do you want to talk about ETL, Chris?
Yeah, I'll talk about ETL. And definitely, if you haven't watched that session from Waldo, I encourage you to do it. He's a great speaker. He can probably talk about this much better than I can. But after you've established that you own and have access to your own data, because that's the most important first step, you want to think about, as you set up this standard, setting up a process by which you don't have to manually by hand convert the data every time you want to publish it. And the most common way to do that, short of a vendor that already supports the SAFE standard and will publish data directly into it, is what's called an extract, transform, and load process. There are a lot of different ways to do that, from raw code like SQL, all the way through using off-the-shelf software products to help with it. But the important part of that process is it reaches into wherever you have access to the data, whether that's a file drop from a vendor or a database that your IT team operates, and then it automatically transforms it into the standard so that it can be published. Setting up that process as early as possible in your development of your munging and development of your data into the SAFE standard is important, because that is what helps you keep the data fresh going into the future. So I definitely encourage you to think about that early in the process in order to make your life easier going on.
Thanks. So we get a lot of questions around data standards and open data where governments are concerned about accurate interpretation of their inspections or their data. And there's a lot of ways to make sure that your information is accurately interpreted and used. So one is just completing the schema as fully as possible, using all of those required fields. And if you've got fields to fill those optional fields, do it. More information allows for more flexibility and clarity with your data. And also to provide a full jurisdiction information feed. This is your opportunity to provide context for whoever is going to be looking at your inspection information. And that context, I've found as a professional in this field, goes a huge way towards ensuring that whoever's using your data is interpreting it correctly, that they have an understanding of, say, how your scoring system works. Is it I've seen scoring systems where it's 0 to 400, and most consumers don't understand that a perfect score is 0. in that scenario. So by providing that context in your jurisdiction feed, you can really eliminate a lot of challenges down the line and prevent more questions from coming to your team. You could actually cut your time in managing information requests by providing a great jurisdiction information feed. Chris, are there anything here you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, those two first points I think are probably the two most important on this slide. The schema is designed to, if you're following all of its guidelines on formatting and testing and providing a jurisdiction feed for context, it's designed to make it hard to misinterpret if all that information is present. So if you follow the schema fully, it should reduce the ways that your data can be misinterpreted, which is often the greatest fear of governments publishing open data is, what if I publish this data and not necessarily is it wrong or something malicious, but what if they just misunderstand it and I look bad? Providing all that information and fully testing the data will really help prevent that from happening. Part of that also, having a third party validate that last bullet point is a great one as well. If you have a trusted local researcher, a local university, or an open data group in your community, they'd be probably very willing to take a look at your data even before you've published it and give you feedback. There are a lot of people really interested in getting access to data like this, and there's a lot of ways to get quick and free and easy feedback about data before you publish it.
Yeah, on that, I would recommend seeing if you have a Code for America brigade near you. These are volunteer groups of civically minded, essentially technology do-gooders, and they love to help out with projects like this. So I would see if there's one near you, even if there's one just in a major city in your state, they would still love to talk with you. And frankly, if you're in a rural area or county and you come to a brigade that's in a major city in your state, I think they're going to be really impressed and thrilled to hear from you.
Yep.
So, and they'd offer free volunteers to validate your data. So give them a look, or you can also look for civic technology meetups as well.
Always hungry for data, hungry for good data. They've seen a lot of bad open data. So open data in a standard like this will make them very happy, and I think that you'll likely see some good feedback from them.
Yeah, thanks. So we will move into questions. I know we didn't cover everything, but we will in the questions when we kind of come back to you. We'll try to get to as many questions as you in the community have. And we just thank you for being here with us today and for your excitement around the safe data standard for aquatic facility inspection information. So thank you, and we'll get to your Q&A now. So we're also going to bring up this poll, trying to capture your thoughts and reactions to the content that you've heard today on the SAFE standard. So please feel free to respond between now and the end of the webinar. We have one question so far in Q&A. Thank you, Tim Callahan. We'll get to your question. And if you do have a question about the data standard, please feel free to drop it into the Q&A. You can also drop it into the chat. It just helps us track the questions that are coming in easier if they're in the Q&A section. So yeah, thank you all. We're so excited to see so many of you here today, and we really want to engage about this new standard. And so we're going to get to Tim's question, which is there a national effort for similar standards for other environmental health programs besides lives, for complaints, wastewater, well water, etc.? So actually, I want to throw out that Lives doesn't have a national effort. It has been a couple of civic tech organizations and a few agencies that came together to create the Live standard. So Code for America created the 1.0 of the standard. Later in the process, Yelp came in and was excited to ingest data or pull that data in that was in the Live standard. And believe that there are now about 35 governments in the US and a couple in Canada that now publish in the live standard. But as far as we know, there isn't a national broad effort around data standards for environmental health. And I think we here had kind of an attempt to create a prototype for how you could quickly spin up data standards or schemas that could be used, because the environmental health community has a lot of standards around how it inspects or what kind of data it tracks, but not for data itself. I mean, Tim, I feel like you're hinting at that we could possibly have some national coordination around data standards. And I think, you know, just speaking for the three of us on this call who have been, you know, dug in on the aquatic facility data, we realized that it would be beneficial for there to be more coordination nationally on data standards for the environmental health community. And this is really a first attempt to do some of that work while minimizing the time and costs that can sometimes come with data standard processes. But if you have any ideas on broadening data standards in the environmental health community, I think we're all ears. And that's a discussion we should all engage in. Maddie, I'm going to bring you in. Have you seen any other data standards promoted across the EH field, or you know, what is NEHA seen in terms of standards development before?
Well, I don't necessarily know specifically, Sarah, on, you know, something specific like the SAFE standard, but areas that could, you know, already have existing ones or new ones to be created could include air quality, vector-borne disease rates and cases, as well as, you know, preparedness and flooding information on flood-prone areas and things like that. So I don't necessarily know specifics, but those are definitely environmental health areas that could, you know, be improved on data standards or already have existing ones.
Great, thanks. Okay, so I want to move on to Andrew's question. Does the adoption of standards like SAFE help when inspection reports are amended, violations added, removed, scores updated, etc.? Chris, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, it definitely can, because you can share that information via the feed that you provide in the SAFE standard. The manner in which you might do that, and then answer kind of the question of how you might do that, depends on how those changes are made. If there's a follow-up inspection, for example, you want to add another inspection to the feed. If it's a revision to the original inspection, you could just modify the existing record in the feed. And the next time the consumers pulled the data, they would see that reflected change. But it should allow you to provide the access to those changes via the standard.
Thanks, Chris. And I'm just pausing here. Tony, could you drop your message in chat, your question in chat into the Q&A, and we'll be sure to get to it. I think it's a good one. So I've got another question on, can you show again the environmental health programs that use open data portals for their EH programs, and where can we see this SAFE information? So I'll answer the last question first. Maddie, I don't know if you can bring up the slide with it. If not, that's okay, and we can perhaps share that information later. So we are launching, we're preparing the website right now for the SAFE schema, or the SAFE standard. And everybody on this call and who is registered will actually be the first invited to see the website and get access to the best practices guide. So that is all coming out in the next couple of days. We've had some delays just trying to get website stuff set up, but I'm excited to get that information to you all first, since you've shown such a clear interest in the SAFE standard. So that's coming in a couple of days, and watch your email. You'll receive an email from Maddie and NEHA. So, and well, we had a little tech issue here, and we're not able to bring up the other slide. I can, I think by memory, just go off of the governments that do use open data that we discovered in the ecosystem scan. So these included Plano, Texas, Allegheny County. This is also, we found at least downloadable data from Florida Health for the entire state, which was really exciting to see. We also found just a few others that also put their pool inspection information or aquatic inspection information out there in open data. So, and when Chris is asking the other question, I'm going to go back to my notes here and pull that up for you, and get the last couple of names for you. So, what else? We also have a question from Dana. Are there NEHA work groups for the environmental data standard development? So no, we don't have a work group right now. However, there is a informatics committee that has come together on various years to talk about open data issues and other topics in informatics that could make a good work group for data standard development. And I think one of the questions that we'll probably be bringing up more with the community is what's the most efficient way for us to get to data standards for the field? If we already have, like, by and large agreement through other mechanisms on what are priorities or what are needed fields to record for types of inspections or classifications of inspections, does that indicate to us, if those have already come through large multi-stakeholder processes, can we just create parallels for those existing processes that convert essentially the policy standards or the inspection standards that have already been created and move that into a data version? So do we need a full work group to get this done? Because work groups can cost a lot of money, take a lot of time. They're democratic. They create a lot of good outcomes, but there's pluses and minuses to both. So I think it'd be really interesting to hear from, for NEHA to hear from the environmental health community on whether they'd like to create work groups for data standard development. I think it's a great idea, and there might be different models that we could take in that approach. Sorry, Maddie, I'm gonna also suggest that they, if folks are interested in data standard development and environmental health, that they reach out to you. I think you're gonna share your email address. So yes, if folks want to follow up, can you drop that into the chat for us?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, because I think these questions are showing some enthusiasm and interest in creating data standards and having stakeholder groups that are building or maintaining this. And it would be great to have folks who are participating here join us in trying to figure out a path forward.
Sarah, before we get started on the next question, I'm going to post the post-evaluation poll. You'll see that on your screen in just a minute. But we can still continue with questions. Just want to get that up.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we've got a couple more questions, and certainly we've got time. So if folks have other questions, happy to get to them. Just taking a look here. So Daryl shares, where standards really take off nationally, it seems to have been, one, a funded effort, and or two, a legal obligation of the implementing agencies. Where does your team stand on these two approaches? So I can only speak from my perspective as someone who's worked on 2 data standards now, but and have studied other data standards. One, I would say I have actually in a prior life, helped other organizations that were working on various standards that were very well funded, and the data standard was not well adopted. And so I don't necessarily think that funded efforts we can look to GTFS as an example of, they had a very small team at Portland's TriMet agency that worked on this, really 2 people. They created a model for a schema. They promoted it. It got interest from a number of other metro agencies, but particularly because a major information provider, essentially Google, picked it up. That's why it got so much traction so quickly. And so I would actually add to this list is that nobody forced Portland to open this up through legal obligation. They did it because they thought it was necessary to do to better serve their constituents, their citizens, their residents, and so they designed something that had great value, that the public recognized, that the private sector recognized, and that led to just kind of this rapid adoption of the data standard. And so I would push back a little bit there, Daryl, but I do see your point where, funding or legal obligation can be, these carrots and sticks around data adoption or data standard adoption, but I'm not sure in environmental health and with all of the responsibilities and costs that many agencies have right now, if legal obligation is going to result in the outcomes we'd like to see. Really is a voluntary effort, and we found that this work can be done with a minimal number of staff hours, like maybe 10 or 15 hours to get it done. That it's really about which governments want to innovate and serve their citizens in new and innovative ways to make a difference. And Chris, is there a question you wanted to take here too?
Sure, I can take Tony's question about the EH Manager tool and whether or not it's compliant with open standards. I don't know a lot about EH Manager besides what I've just looked at on their website, but it does appear to be a modern tool that provides export capability to get access to your data. So my guess is that there's probably is a way to get your data out and then do the work necessary to ETL it and get it into the standard. I did want to use this as a chance to talk for a moment about how you identify if your EH tool, your inspections tool, has machine readable data in it, and talk about how you might get access to it, because we think that might be a generic question people have, similar to what you asked about EH Manager. If you have digital access to your results, they're in an app, they're on your website in a searchable format, you can get a PDF that's not a scan of a paper form. Basically, if they're not locked up in a file cabinet somewhere in your office, you probably have the data somewhere in machine readable format. It's probably going to be either in a database or a file somewhere that you have internally if it's a self-hosted app, or it's going to be in a database in your provider for a cloud-hosted app that you have. If it's cloud-hosted, hopefully part of the negotiation process or something you can work with your vendor on is getting access to that data in bulk in an exportable way. EH Manager, for example, cites that they have the ability to export data out into standard formats. That's a great sign that you can get data out of that tool. Whatever you have in the cloud, hopefully it has some either API or export access to get access to that data. If it is a self-hosted tool operated by your IT department, talk to your IT department. Chances are there's a database that backs up that
that tool, that application, and they might be able to get you kind of in the back door to access that database, and that's probably the best way to get bulk access in that case. So really, it comes down to your particular software application, how you get access to it. But basically, if it's not locked up in a file cabinet, it probably is machine readable. And then it comes down to getting access to it and then going through the work to determine what level of effort it will be to transform that data into the standard. But finding the data is obviously the first challenge there.
Thanks, Chris.
You want me to talk about Tony's second question, or you want to talk about the scoring for inspections?
Well, I wanted to go back to the anonymous question that we had asking which jurisdictions had their aquatic facility inspection information in open data. So I've got that list real quick to share with you all. So we have LA County, Louisville, Kentucky, Montgomery, Maryland, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Fort Worth, Texas, Plano, Texas, and Arlington, Virginia. In an interesting quirk, so we were looking at data from, we were doing this in 2019, the ecosystem scan. We found that Georgia actually had their inspection information from 2018 out in open data, but that had been done in a partnership with a major newspaper in the state. And the newspaper had, the state didn't have their information itself in open data, but essentially a third party opened that data on a yearly basis and placed that data in a tool called Tableau. So that was an interesting exception to see there. So I hope that answers your question. Chris, was there another question you wanted to tackle on the list?
Dina's question about the venue type field, I was going to be able to tackle that one. I don't want Tony's questions about scoring for inspections to go unanswered though as well.
Okay, why don't you talk about venue, and then I'll chime in on scoring.
Sounds great. Dana, your question about venue type is a hopefully a pretty easy one to answer. Venue type is the type of pool or water facility that is, whether it's a pool or a hot tub or a wading pool, etc. That's just where you denote literally the type of body of water that it is. And in the standard, there's an enumeration of the different options for that, or in other field if you've got something that doesn't fit into that group of options. All right, back to you, Sarah.
Thanks. Hey, Chris, can you point out to me where you're seeing the question on scoring?
Oh, it's Tony posted both questions as one question. The question is, what would be an algorithm for scoring pool inspections? Are state rules assigned a numerical weight?
So one, I think we should make clear here that the SAFE schema or SAFE standard does not have an algorithm for scoring pool inspections and is completely agnostic on whether one scores or does not. Certainly, we found quite a few examples of governments that do not score, and we learned our lesson from the lives inspection data on the 2.0 of that data standard for restaurants, that in fact there's many jurisdictions around the United States, either at a local or a state level, which have laws on the books which prohibit scoring of any sort. And so we really designed the SAFE standard to give flexibility to jurisdictions, whether they have scoring or not. I know that there's a lot of private sector interest in trying to use algorithms to create one score to sort of rule them all. So you could see restaurants that are all scored with the same framework. But I won't go into it deeply. I have my own kind of questions about that because I think it's really hard to compare exactly apples to apples and normalize those scores through algorithm. And yeah, so yeah, if you got a score, pop it into the SAFE standard. If you don't, No worries.
Yeah, to
And-
add on to that, Sarah, one of the things that we learned from the live standard that we explicitly made part of the substandard is it is ultimately flexible to whatever your jurisdiction's scoring regime is, but those scores are made available in a machine readable way. So you can provide the score on an inspection, and then in that sidecar file that I talked about, you can actually provide the scoring ranges. So A, B, C, D, E, F, for example, or 0 to 100. As well as what a passing score would be. So if you have a passing score for your jurisdiction, you can put that all in there, and then whoever is consuming the data can use that information about your scoring system to decide how to display it in an accurate way, or if they want to try and come up with a consistent standard, they can use that to basically generate a score, but it's going to be based on whatever your scoring system is. So we allow you to provide those details in the standard in the sidecar.
Thanks for clarifying that, Chris. Yeah, I think it's so important that folks also realize that we've built into this the ability for you to really describe what's going into your fields, particularly around scoring, because we've seen in our own experience where constituents have real confusion over a scoring system and frequently misinterpret it. So I've seen where jurisdictions have a 0 to 100 score, and folks will think that a 5 out of 100 is bad, but it turns out that jurisdiction actually provides scores based on the number of points that a restaurant has assigned as sort of negative points. So, they get essentially demerits for every time they don't inspect well on a topic, and folks just don't understand how those scoring systems work. So by providing those descriptions, you really help your citizens and residents and visitors understand what they're looking at and have great context.
This is I think one of the many reasons, and I touched on this in the talk as well, why open data standards are valuable. One of the biggest fears, and honestly one of the biggest risks that governments have when they release data as open data is misinterpretation. And open data standards, by providing a consistent and verifiable way to publish your data, help limit misunderstanding. By having a consistent set of what units are used and the types of values that could be used for a particular column and how you notate what a score is, it reduces the likelihood that somebody picks up a data set with no documentation, misunderstands the results, and causes a problem. So I think this is a good example of where data standards really can aid in public consumption of open data.
I want to get to, I know we've only got a minute or so left, but Dana's question about describing the venue type field. This is a great question, Dana. Chris, do you want to quickly summarize that and I can add on?
Well, I think I actually answered the venue type one already. That was before we went back to the scoring.
Oh, sorry.
There's
sorry.
one more from Sharon, it looks at the bottom though.
Okay. Have you considered working with the CDC's environmental tracking program and the 25 states that are funded through that grant on developing data standards? These funded states have worked with the CDC to develop nationally consistent data measures for some environmental measures for data collection. And so we have heard about these efforts. We were on a specific grant for aquatic facility inspection data. So we've stayed in our lane with that, but it's certainly very exciting to see other efforts happening. And we hope that what we've done here can help provide a model for how to quickly develop data standards based on existing work and existing multi-stakeholder processes. And it would be great to engage. So Sharon, if you have thoughts on how we can or should engage with that program, please let us know and drop an email to Maddie. We'd love to talk with you about that.
Actually, Sarah, it's funny that you brought that up. I'm actually the project lead on the tracking project for NEHA, and we do work with the CDC tracking network and the grantees that are in that project.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Cool. Well, we are right at just after 11 o'clock. If you haven't taken the poll, please do. And if you have any more questions for us, please email Maddie at NEHA. And we are excited to get you the best practices guide and first access to the data standard. So thanks for joining us today. Thank you to Chris and Maddie for putting this together with us. And yeah, have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.